Morning, thank you. It's really lovely to be able to be with you all this morning. As Lewis said, we've known each other for quite a long time, and I'm so pleased for you that you get to know him too and get to know how much of a blessing he is. Lewis and I were curates together. One of my biggest learnings from being a curate was never agree to preach before you've seen the passage. I'm sad to say I didn't heed my own advice when I agreed to talk to you this morning. I mean, I volunteered to preach on this gospel reading. And it's just not a comfortable read, is it? If anything, it makes me hugely uncomfortable. Perhaps, though, it's apt on Stir Up Sunday, a call to be stirred up from my settled status quo. And perhaps an apt reading in a year that has felt so full of deep stirring, unsettling, and discomfort. For me, this story does what all good stories do. It calls into question how I view God, how I view the world, how I view myself, and how I view others. It's almost like a wake-up call, a calibration exercise. Am I in line with what it means to follow Christ's reign, to seek God's kingdom first? Or are my priorities, actions, and heart motives out of balance? Interestingly, we read in the story that both the sheep and the goats seem to have something the same. Although they recognize the Son of Man coming in glory, they have not recognized him among the least of these, or as some translations put it, the little ones, those on the edge of society who struggle to feed and water themselves, those pushed out, ostracized, overlooked. And so the story causes me to pause and consider, where do I see God? Detached on a throne of glory, or embodied among the suffering of the little ones? I remember at theological college, one of the staff talking about how uncomfortable we are identifying with God in human messiness. The tendency is to look for a king. You only have to cast your eyes over most hymn books to see the lean towards the victorious Son of Man with his angels, rather than the dispossessed victim of violence. I mean, even before hymn books, I know there were days before that. A part of the Hebrew Bible meta-narrative is the people of Israel's demand for a king. They want a king like everyone else. But maybe God's kingly rule isn't the kind of rule we expect. It doesn't particularly demonstrate great strength to be found in the face of a refugee or an anxious single parent trying to feed their kids in the school holidays, or a gay Christian wondering why they're seen as a stranger in what should be loving community. I write poetry, and I'm convinced that poetry is magic. It gets under your skin in ways that other things just don't seem to. So I've written something to try and sum up a bit of what I think this calibration exercise is about. What kind of king is easily mistaken for the undeserving poor? More to the point, what kind of king thinks that going incognito, naked, hungry, in prison, sick, a wise trick to pull? He fooled us for sure. Nobody looked into that tear-streaked face and placed his royal lineage. Why would they? How were we supposed to guess that uninvited guest, stranger, refugee, human trafficked immigrant was him again? When were we supposed to work that out? There was no fanfare or angel-accompanied entrances when he walked into town, sat down on that bench and swigged a bit of special brew. Who knew that was the king? Weird kind of ruler. If we'd known, if only we'd known he'd shown up, we would of course have lent a hand. You know, it's hard to decipher who's genuinely in need these days. Don't want to waste our efforts on wasters. I wonder, does my lean towards strong king need some recalibration? Do I need to readjust my vision and see, once again, the interconnectedness of all people? That to love God is to love the least of these. To love the least of these is to love God. And love is really the only sermon I ever have. Don't invite me to preach again, because that's probably all you'll ever get. We are messy, but we find God in the middle of mess. And actually, how comforting to realise that in our own times of need, we might glimpse amongst us Christ's self. That rather than simply being detached, God is also close at hand, even within us. The sheep in the story have their hearts in the right place. Their motives for social action and compassion spring unknowingly from a well of divine love. In honesty, I think I am often a muddly mix of both sheep and goat. But as I allow myself to be stirred up by God's Spirit, I pray I may too draw from the divine well and realign my heart to God's beating heart of love. My prayer is that you too may be calibrated by Christ the King. Amen.